I'm really honored to be a part of this program. It's one of those spaces at Fuller that I think really appeals to my heart's interest and the things that really are important to me. So I'm really thankful for the chance to be a part of this program. Some of you know that I am, if I can say I'm proud of this, I'm proud of the fact that my career has been split almost evenly between the academic world and the ministry world. I was a pastor and a campus minister and a youth pastor and a church planter and a senior pastor and an interim pastor. I joke that I've done everything in the church except children's ministry, which I'm terrified of doing. That's the one thing I cannot do. I'm just scared to death. I love kids. I just can't preach to them. But I've done ministry in almost every setting for 17 years. And then God kind of called me into the academic world, and I've done that for 17 years. And I raise that because to me, it's the value of the both and. That we do the rigorous academic work that feeds our minds and our intellect, and our scholarship is on par with kind of any community that we're a part of. But we're really doing it for the sake of the church. We're doing it for the sake of God's kingdom. And that to me is the uniqueness about Fuller's program. You will find programs that are just fantastic at giving you the skills, the training you need to do the good work of justice. There's actually a lot of programs out there. Or you'll find programs that will teach you some really strong theology. But I think one of the strengths of our program is the both and. It teaches you the sound theology, the academic thinking, the intellectual engagement in community with some great scholars and teachers. But the fact that this is actually translatable and applicable to your ministry is actually maybe one of the most exciting things about the MJA program at Fuller. So for me, as someone who has been in both worlds, yeah, do the numbers and do the math. You'll see how old I am. 17 years in the ministry world and 17 years in the academic world. I started when I was 4. Asian don't raisin. I look really young for my age. But being in these both worlds, I appreciate how much we need to integrate the two. And I'll close with this. When we fail to integrate the two, that's when a lot of stuff went awry in the evangelical world in particular. And I know folks coming from different streams and different spaces. But my background is as an immigrant, it was actually in the evangelical immigrant church. I grew up in the Korean church that was very much shaped by Korean Christianity, and that we would have early morning prayer meetings, and we would have, kind of the revival meetings. I was very much a part of the Korean church in the U.S. and in Korea. But we were very much shaped by evangelical culture. So I grew up listening to Billy Graham. I grew up listening to, all these kind of great Tony Campolo and these great kind of evangelical preachers were very much what shaped my formation very early on. But in a negative way at times as well, because as many of you know, there was a moment, and it's throughout the 20th century, not just kind of one moment, but throughout the 20th century, where there was a bifurcation between justice and evangelism. And evangelism was seen as this is what good fundamentalist evangelicals, Bible-believing conservative Protestants do. We, quoting Moody, the world is a wrecked vessel. Let's go and just save all the individuals out of the wrecked vessel, but let the wrecked vessel be a wrecked vessel. That's very much a fundamentalist evangelical frame of thinking. The world is messed up, so let's not worry about that. Let's not care about the world. Let's just save each other. I often use the illustration of how church architecture usually would reflect Noah's Ark, and that sanctuaries look like bottom of ships. And the intentionality there is to demonstrate we are separate from the world because we don't care what happens to the world. Let the world get judged and destroyed as long as we are safe in our kind of safe Christian spaces. So that's what you have a lot of that narrative built into 20th and 21st century, especially evangelical conservative Protestant Christianity, that we do evangelism, we save people from the broken world and then get them onto our Noah's Ark, but we don't really care about the world that is out there. That narrative was beginning to shift in the late 20th and early 21st century. And you had some very significant individuals who were saying, no, we got to bring it back to some of this justice orientation. We can't ignore justice because we're focusing only on evangelism. Some of the first to do this were actually Latino theologians, Rene Padilla and Orlando Costas. They had a group of Latino theologians who were very influential in calling evangelicals to greater social engagement. You were seeing this in the Black church with folks like Tom Skinner and John Perkins, who were calling out evangelicals to say, you've got to engage the social justice issues as well as the personal evangelism. It's a both and. Then within the evangelical community itself, you saw the Ron Siders and the Jim Wallaces. So there was a kind of a generation. They're now in their 70s, 80s, 90s. Many have passed on the glory. And they're kind of, have kind of passed that time frame. But they were the prophetic voices speaking to conservative Protestant evangelicals. Hey, do not neglect the call to evangelism and justice together, not just evangelism, but evangelism and justice together. What happened, though, is that it's had some challenges going into the following generations. And what's interesting to me is that Gen Z, and I'm the parent of two 20-year-olds, 20-year-old and 23-year-old, their concern for justice doesn't come from the church. And this is with their dad preaching at them all the time and, leaving, Wallace's books and my books lying around so they can look at them. But their heart for justice is not coming from the church. It's actually coming from Taylor Swift. It's slightly joking, but not really. It's actually coming from environmental movements that they're a part of. It's coming from, when we lived in Chicago, my daughter, she just turned 21. She was part of the BLM marches. So there was a lot of this justice gearing towards justice and advocacy, but they weren't getting that in the church. And so how do we actually reclaim what is a biblical mandate to justice? And if we do this through like the need is there, that's very short-lived. Because if we do it like, oh, I see a need, I'm going to go help that community out, oftentimes in a very paternalistic sort of way, it's very short-lived, and compassion doesn't last. I will be blunt about this. People say, you can do acts of compassion. I agree, but it has a very brief short shelf life. Compassion wears you out because you're always the one giving when you think in terms of compassion. But if you think in terms of biblical justice as a calling, as part of your formation, as part of your discipleship, that actually changes the equation of how we do this justice work. And so that's, again, I go back to the both and. The fact that Fuller is trying to do something that's both and, a theological grounding, but also the engaging and connecting to your practical work on the ground. The short-livedness of feeling bad about something, compassion, versus the longer sustainability of a spiritually rooted and biblically rooted justice, it's pretty substantial. And I've seen this firsthand, where I've had folks who are like, oh, we'll do multi-ethnic ministry because we feel like there's a need. That was very short-lived. Once you started actually dealing with racial differences and ethnic differences, like, okay, we're done with that. But those who are feeling like there's a biblical call to restore the community of faith, those are the folks who've stuck with it for decades and decades. So I'm hoping that Fuller is that kind of space, that kind of community where the theological, spiritual, formational, discipleship, educational, all the stuff that forms our depth of our understanding of justice gets translated into the work that so many of you are already doing. How does it become a sustainable, biblical, ecclesial work rather than just something that we do for a time period?